All right, so let's get started. Hopefully other people will join. Now, I want this to be an interactive session. So if you guys have any questions, please put it in the chat, and I will answer them, as I see some questions over there. And of course, towards the end, we'll have a Q&A session. So um, I'll try to answer as many questions as you guys have in that Q&A session. All right, so let's get started. So we're going to talk about MTA-STS. This is actually a new feature that was recently released in Zeemes, and it was pushed yesterday. So those folks who are already using Zeemes, you should have this feature already in it. All right, so I'm not going to talk a lot about why we need MTA-STS. Instead, I'm going to talk about how to implement it in Zeemes, okay, and how easy it is to implement it. There are lots of articles on the internet that talk about, why you need it and why you should have it and this and that. So I'm going to skip all that part. I'm going to go briefly on what it is and, the requirements, how to publish it and all that. But most of the time, I'm going to spend on the latter part, which is how to publish it. And then we'll talk about TLS-Reports as we go along. All right, so let's see, what is MTS-STS? It stands for Mail Transfer Agent Strict Transport Security. The strict transport security is, it's more important, right? Using TLS is kind of optional. But when you use MTS-STS, it makes sure that encryption is used, and I'll talk about that a little bit. And then we're going to talk about the man-in-the-middle attack. How is that possible? All right, so for the demo, I'm going to be using two domain names, bzine.com and syncrehelp.net. Both of these domains are real domains. They are registered and they get emails, okay? And the Zeemes that I'm going to be working on is miles.synametrics.com. So in fact, if you type that URL from your computer, you will end up going to miles.synametrics.com. All right, so these are the two domains that we're going to be working with for the rest of the session. All right, so let's talk about why we need MTS-STS, okay? So here's a sample communication for an email that was sent out from bzine.com to a Gmail account. Now, on the top part, the stuff that is in gray is actually in clear. That part is not encrypted. The bottom part, which has a white background, is encrypted. And the way it works is that the sender, by the way, the lines that you see in red are from the sender. The lines that you see in blue are from the recipient. So the very first message that the sender sends is the hello command. In this case, it's ehello miles.synametrics.com. Google responds to that ehello with a bunch of features that it supports. And one of the features is start TLS. And when the sender sees, oh, the receiving end supports start TLS, it then starts the TLS communication. So if you see the second red line is start TLS, and then Google says, okay, sure, let's do TLS from now on. And then you see a new connection, which is a secure connection. So the remaining data is TLS. Now, what happens is, let's say if there's something in between bzine.com and Gmail, for example, an ISP. A lot of ISPs have proxy servers that watch the communication because they want to stop spam going out from their servers, right? So if somebody's watching, they can change this non-encrypted part and exclude start TLS from Google's response. So if the sender does not see start TLS, guess what? It's gonna send that email completely in clear. Okay, so the next slide shows that. So in this case, the ehello command does not have start TLS, and because it does not have start TLS, the entire email goes out without encryption. And that's what I meant when I said using encryption is optional. And that's what MTA-STS prevents, meaning nobody should be able to come in the middle and say, hey, encryption is not available. Because what the sender does is it checks a few things in your DNS server. If those things are there, then the sender makes sure that TLS is used. If it cannot be used, it'll generate an error, which will go back to the original sender, letting them know, hey, TLS wasn't available, and therefore your email failed. All right. So here's a flow diagram of how it works. Now, this is from the sender's perspective. The first thing that sender does, which is at the top, it looks in the DNS server for a special text record. If the text record exists, that means, okay, I'm going to go one step further, and I am going to fetch an HTTPS policy from a web server, not a DNS server, it's a web server. If this policy is found, that means I have to make sure encryption is used. If encryption is not used, then I'm just going to generate an error. So that's how it works in the background. And then eventually, it makes sure that the start TLS is there and it can be used. The certificate is trusted and it uses TLS 1.2 at least. All right. And then eventually the message gets delivered to the final recipient. So that's how it works. Okay. So the next slide talks about what are the requirements for MTA-STS. There are 3 requirements. The first 2 requirements is the first one is a requirement. The second one is an optional feature. Okay, and I'm going to talk about that. So the first one, which is MTA-STS.bzyne.com. Remember, this bzyne.com is a test domain that I'm using. Okay, in your case, it could be any domain that you want. So it looks for MTA-STS bzyne.com. So actually, let me do a lookup so that you know. So here's what I do. I do an NS lookup. Query type is text, and then MTA-STS bzyne.com. Now you could do this from your end too, because this is a real domain. Okay. All right. So you see, it returns this value. Okay. And once this is found, the sender is going to fetch a document from your web server. All right, the second DNS record is for TLS reporting, and I'm going to come back to TLS reporting in a minute. All right, so the second requirement, which is this MTA-STS.txt file, this is what makes publishing MTA-STS a bit challenging. And the reason I say challenging is because all you need to publish is a very, very small document, but that document has to follow certain rules. So for example, you have to have a web server, right? Which is, not that difficult. Then the host name of the URL has to be MTA-STS.bzyne.com. So for example, if I take if I want to know what is Google's MTA-STS, I would do this. MTA-STS.gmail.com / well-known MTA-STS.txt. Okay. So this is exactly what Google's policy is going to look like. So let me bring that up. All right, so on this tab, I have Google's MTS-STS, and this is it. This is the entire text. So publishing this file requires that you follow all these steps, okay? And it's a very small file, and there's a whole bunch of things that needs to happen. All right, the second thing, host name has to be MTA-STS followed by the domain name.com. So in case of Gmail, it was gmail.com. In case of bzyne, it's bzyne.com. And then the certificate has to be trusted. You cannot use a self-signed certificate or an expired certificate. It has to be trusted. And of course, you need to do that on 443. So all these requirements, there's a lot of work that needs to happen in order to publish this, right? And that's the most common it's basically a lot of work just to publish a very, very small document. And this is where Zeemes comes in. So I'm going to do a demo. I'm going to show you how this publishing part is done very, very easily in Zeemes. Okay, so let's go to the next page, which is actually a demo. So I'm going to do a demo. So here I am connected to miles.synametrics.com. Okay, like I said, you can actually go to this website from your end. Now, before I show you how MTA-STS is done, I want to show you two features in Zeemes that will make your life a lot easier. They help a lot if you have those features enabled. The first one is under Tools. It's called DNS integration. Now, this is a feature that was added recently in the latest version of Zeemes. When DNS integration is enabled, basically, you can enable your DNS servers. Right now, Zeemes only supports GoDaddy and AWS Route 53. All right. So right now I have two domains. So if I go here in the SMTP configuration, I see the two domains. One is bzyne.com. The second one is syncrehelp.net. This one is hosted on GoDaddy. So the DNS server for bzyne.com is on GoDaddy. The DNS server for syncrehelp is on Amazon. And both are integrated with Zeemes, okay? Now, okay, so that's one thing. You should consider integrating DNS server because it's going to make your life a lot easier. The second thing that is very important is the certificate that is being used on this Zeemes. It's Let's Encrypt. And using Let's Encrypt, there are two benefits of Let's Encrypt. First, it's free, but that's not the more important benefit. The more important benefit is that you can do things programmatically. So without any human interaction, you can just create certificates. So there's no need to, submit a CSR and then wait for the CA to sign the certificate back, merge the file. There's a lot of work that goes on when you don't use Let's Encrypt. But when you use Let's Encrypt, it's very, very easy. All right, so here's the goal. Our goal is to publish MTA-STS, all right? Okay, so what you do is you go to reports, MTA-STS and TLS reporting. Now remember, I have two domains. The first one, bzyne.com, MTA-STS is already published for that one, but it is not published for syncrehelp, okay? So when I go to this page, since bzyne.com is already published, I actually see a TLS report at the bottom. TLS report is a report that is sent from other domains, like Google will send you, Microsoft will send you. So when Google sends an email to, in this case, bzyne.com, Google makes sure that encryption was used. If encryption is not used, they're going to send you the error, letting you know what part failed. So for example, start TLS wasn't supported, or maybe the certificate was expired, or the certificate wasn't trusted. Any problem related to encryption, Google will let you know. And if there is a problem, you will see an error section at the bottom, and you will know, oh, something's wrong with my certificate. Okay, so other companies basically will send you these reports when this is enabled. All right, now, so in case of bzyne.com, like I said, it's already published. However, it is in testing mode. So what I mean by that is if I look at the policy, so this is in Google's policy. Google says that the mode is enforced. Now, if I do the same thing, if I just change this domain name to bzyne.com. All right, so this is the policy for bzyne.com, and it says that it's testing. This mode defines if you are currently in a testing mode or you are on enforce mode, and then there's another possibility called none. Testing and enforce are probably more used. So initially, you would create a policy in testing mode. You look at the TLS report that you receive from other servers and make sure that there are no errors. Because once you change this to enforce, that means that start TLS has to be there or you won't get any emails, okay? So you have to make sure that you run it in testing mode for a few days and then eventually switch. So now let's assume that this bzyne.com, right now I'm in testing mode for bzyne, right? in order to switch, all I do is click that modify and I switch this testing to enforce, and that's it. And I save it. And now my policy, if I refresh this, it's going to say enforce. Okay. So that's the enforce report. Okay. Now let me show you how to create a policy for a domain that does not have any MTA-STS. Okay. So I'm going to switch to syncrehelp.com, which does not have any policy. And I'm going to click display. Now, when that happens, this thing shows a bunch of steps that I need to complete. Okay. So these are the steps that I need to complete in order to publish the policy. Step number 1 is that start TLS must be enabled in Zeemes. In this case, it's already there, so the complete shows up. Okay. If in your case, if it doesn't show up, then you would go to SMTP configuration and make sure that the start TLS is enabled. Okay. All right. So the first step is already done. The second step is publishing the document. The third step are adding the 2 DNS records that I talked about. So this is the first DNS record. This is the second DNS record. And since my domain name is, the DNS for that domain is registered on AWS, I see this button here that says, hey, I can simply click this button and it is going to push a text record to Amazon. Okay. So step number 3 and step number 4 are pretty straightforward. And it's very quickly done. So what I'm going to do is, instead of doing step 2, I'm first going to do 3 and 4. So I'll show you how that works. Okay. Now, if I click this, notice it opens a new tab instead of modifying the same tab. This way this page stays open. Okay. So now this is my text record. It's going to add this is the domain name. This is the name of the record. This is the value for the record. Okay. And this is the TLS. And it's going to go on AWS Route 53. So I click submit. And that's it. Now it has been published on AWS. Okay. And I do the same thing for this record. All right. So both of these, so step 3 and 4 are already complete. I'm now going to do step 2. Step 2 requires that it has to publish this text. Okay. Now, if I copy this and I paste it here, I'm going to get an error because a lot of things are not done yet. Okay. So the things that are not complete, first, this host name does not exist right now. Okay. And even if the host name existed, the certificate is not meant for this host name. And so that's the part I'm going to show. All right, so let's go here. So in order to publish this, all I do is click publish now. Now, here is the suggested policy. Like I said, you should leave your policy in testing mode for some time. Okay. The third line is the set of MX records. In this case, there's only one computer that is configured for MX. But if you look at, let's say, let me bring up Google. Okay, here's Google's policy. Okay, there are multiple MX lines because Google has multiple MX. So and for the second one, they put a star here, which means everything. It's basically a wildcard. Okay, so if you have multiple MX, you would have multiple lines here. This last line is the age of this policy file, which is specified in seconds. So this number 604,800, it is number of seconds in 2 weeks. That means that other servers on the internet will cache this policy for about 2 weeks. Okay. All right. So this is I'm satisfied with my policy file, and now I am going to click publish. But remember, when I publish it, still there are things that are not done. Okay. So even it's been published, my host name still fails. So if I were to go to this page, right, my host name, let me copy this into a separate tab. Okay. And I'm going to go back to Google here. All right, so this host name is still not there, so I'm going to get an error. So this page shows you the incomplete tasks, okay? The first task is that I need to have either an A record or a CNAME record. If I do an A record, that A record needs to point to this IP address. If I do a CNAME record, that has to point to this host name. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention one thing. Notice that the host name or the server where this is running, it's miles.synametrics.com. Has nothing to do with the domain names that I have configured on this machine, okay? So a lot of times people get confused. Oh, my host name has to be mail.mycompany.com if my domain name is mycompany.com. That is not a requirement. You can have as many domain names on this host, okay? All right, so coming back to what I was discussing. So either I need an A record, which is here, or I need a CNAME record. Now, CNAME records are better than A record because let's say if the IP changes, I only change it once rather than 20 different places. So CNAME is definitely better, okay? All right, so now what I do is I click on this and this is, okay, it's gonna add a CNAME record for this domain. This is the name of the record, and this is going to be the value. So MTA-STS for that domain will point to this, okay? So I'm going to submit. Now, already I've submitted it, but the problem is that DNS entries sometimes take about 5-10 minutes, okay, to actually sync. So it's very likely that if I try creating a certificate right now, it probably might fail because I just added the DNS record, okay? So the first thing I want to do is wait like a little bit and make sure. So where'd that go? Okay, this one. If I hit enter here, and if my host name resolves, that means my DNS is synced, okay? So let's see what happens. Okay, it's still not there. So I have to wait a little bit. Unfortunately, we have to wait. We don't have a choice but not to wait here, okay? If you guys have any questions in the meantime, please post it on the meeting chat while we're waiting for the DNS to sync, okay? Another thing that we could do is run an NS lookup. So if you go here, okay. So if I do this NS lookup here, what happened? Copy. Okay, let's see. Oh, it's there now. So it returned that MX lookup is there. Okay, so this thing should work now, but the certificate is not trusted. Oh, actually, no, I forgot one more thing. I have to restart Syncrify, okay, because this host name is not recognized yet. All right, so the host name is there, so I'm going to go back here, and now I am going to reissue my Let's Encrypt SSL certificate. And in order to do that, I'm just going to click reissue certificate. Now I get to the Let's Encrypt page. Another very, very important thing. The original certificate is for miles.synametrics.com. The goal is to add a host name so that all three host names, which is miles.synametrics.com, MTA-STS synchrohelp.net, as well as MTA-STS bzine.com, are served by the same certificate. Okay. Now, since I am adding it here, I don't need to add those other domains here. Zeemes already knows that we need to have the other domains also. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to click submit. So this is a term that gets displayed for Let's Encrypt, and I proceed. Now, once it's done, I should see a restart button. And once it's restarted, I should have my MTA-STS published. There we go. So that's it. Now I restart Zeemes. If you guys have any questions, I guess you can, type it in the chat. Okay. so this is restarted now. And if I go back to MTA TLS reporting and I switch to Syncre help, there we go. So right now the reports is empty, right? Because it's going to take about 24 hours for other servers to report for this particular domain because I just added it. So I don't see anything in the reports. But since I don't see any requirements, that means everything is working. Now, if I go back here, this should come up. Okay, what am I doing wrong here? Let me see. Well, this came up. So I must have mistyped the. I'm doing some, oh, I'm missing N here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this URL earlier was returning an error, but once the policy is published, I can go here and that's it. So it's that simple, publishing the MTS-STS, okay? So that is it as far as the demo goes. Now we have a very small poll. So if somebody can just, if you guys can take a few minutes to answer, you'll probably see a question on your end. If you could just answer that, I'd appreciate. And then, so I have one more question for this poll. And then we'll, I'll just open up for Q&A if you guys have any questions. So we've got two polls. Let's see, how do I open the second one? Okay, so yes, so somebody's asking, will this recording be available? Yes, it will be available. It's been recorded, so we'll put it on our website, so you'll be able to see it. All right, any other questions? So I am closing this poll, and then we're going to go to the next one. All right, so this is the other poll that we have. All right, so any questions, please? Okay, does MTA-STS guarantee 100% encryption? Okay, so that's a good one. So MTA-STS only ensures transport level encryption. So what I mean by transport level is that any email, before it reaches the final destination, it goes through multiple SMTP servers, right? So the transport level encryption only makes sure that in between the two servers, the data is encrypted. But once it reaches the other server, there's no guarantee that it's going to be encrypted. So let's assume that it goes through 5 servers. There are 5 places where your email is going to stay in an unencrypted manner. The only way to guarantee that it stays encrypted, throughout its journey, is to use end-to-end encryption. So, and if somebody is interested in end-to-end encryption, all you got to do is go to Home, go to Plugins, and there's a plugin for end-to-end encryption, okay? Which is the very first one, okay? All right, next question. Okay, so Zeemes says delivery will fail if for any reason encryption cannot be used. So if I set this up and the receiving side does not, this is correct. So Brian is asking, if you set this up for your domain, will the delivery fail if you deliver them? So okay, let me make this a little bit clear. If you set MTA-STS for your domain, let's say your domain is example.com. When Google or Hotmail tries to send you an email and they cannot confirm your policy is correct, then Google won't be able to send you the email. You will still be able to send it to Google, because when you send an email to Google, it's Google's policy that's in the picture, not your policy. But your policy will only affect incoming emails, not outgoing emails. Okay, Brian, does that answer your question? Okay, if I miss anything, please, ask me what would you like to know. But just keep in mind that your MTA-STS policy will affect inbound emails, not outbound. And then you will receive a TLS report for your domain from other servers. So if you look at the report, the TLS report, I see, well, this is a test domain, right? So there are only like 3 messages that went out for this one. So Google sent a report, and then of course Synametrics sent a report. So from here you will know if something is wrong with your certificate. All right, any other questions? No questions? Okay, do we need to create a user for okay, another good one. Okay, so the TLS reports will go to this address, okay? Let me write this in Notepad so you can see it clearly. So the reports will be sent to this address, okay? From, let's say, Google or Microsoft, whatever. In fact, this address is specified in one of the 2 DNS records that were created for the Synchro Help, okay? So you can change that address, but this is a default. This is the recipient that Zeemes is going to look for. If you change this recipient, there's a way to change the configuration in Zeemes so it goes through. So let's say if you decide to change this recipient to 123, then you can do it, but I don't know if there's any benefit in doing that. But anyway, any messages that come to this address will be automatically handled by Zeemes. And it is going to extract the data, which is basically a JSON file. Zeemes will automatically process that JSON file and eventually will display the report that you see on this screen. Okay. Any other questions? You're welcome. So I guess if no one has any questions, then maybe we can end the meeting, but maybe another 10, 15 seconds to see if another question pops up. Okay, there's one more question. Can we use MTS-STS and Zeemes even if it's not our primary email server? Okay, so usually well, depending upon how your Zeemes is configured, right? You may have Zeemes as your spam filter, and then there's another MTA-STS downstream. Let's assume that's Exchange. Like I said, MTA-STS only affects outbound emails, okay? Meaning, I'm sorry, MTA-STS only affects inbound emails. So if Zeemes is the first server in the picture, then it'll work. Now, if Exchange is the first server and not Zeemes, then you just have to make sure that Exchange uses an SSL certificate that is valid. Because if Exchange is the receiving server, and if you implement MTA-STS, Google is going to assume that, hey, your certificate is valid. And if it's invalid, it's not going to deliver the email, okay? So as long as your Exchange is configured correctly, you don't have any problem. Now, one thing that's going to happen if Zeemes is not your primary server, and that is, where do TLS reports go? Because I don't think if an email goes with this address to Exchange, Exchange will say, hey, this is an unknown user. I don't know what to do with it, right? So because of that, you should always put Zeemes in first, so that Zeemes knows how to handle this report. Of course, using reports is optional. The problem is, if you don't use reports, then if there's a problem with TLS, you won't know what those problems are. So it's always recommended that you put Zeemes before Exchange, but there's nothing that stops you from putting Exchange in front. All right, any other questions? All right, so I guess that's pretty much it. I guess nobody has any questions, so we'll call this done. If you guys have any questions, later on, you can always reach us via email, or you can call us, and we'll be more than happy to answer any of your questions. All right. Okay, so last chance. If I don't get any questions, then we'll probably end the meeting. All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone. All right. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.